whakaia e koe ki te hara mai, ki te mau mai tēnei kaupapa ki o tātou wahine. Kia ora tātou. Kamai.
Madam, tēnā koe, Madam Vicar General. Hoi no, mihi tuatahi kia tātou katoa, e roto i tēnei whare, e mihi kau atu ana ki te whare e tū nei, ki te marae waho, tū atu, tū mai, ki ngā tini me ngā mano, kua hau mai i roto i tēnei whare krakia, kua noho tahi i runga i roto i te marae e raro hoki i ngā maru ātawhai o Ngāti Whātua. Nō reira ka nui te hari, ka nui te koa. Mihi kau atu ana hoki kia koutou katoa ngā wahine toa. Te Rōpū Anglican Women's Centre, tēnā koutou katoa mo tēnei klanga, kia haere mai, kia kōrero tahi, kia hakarongo ki ngā mahi kua mahitia, i ngā ringaringa kaha, ngā ringaringa ātawhai, ngā wahine, te hahi mihinare. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko waia hau, ko Hera, tikana ngā kōrero o Madam Vicar General. I just want to take a little time out of my introduction and just acknowledge, I say this with all due respect to you, Madam Vicar General. We haven't had a Māori Vicar General, and I want to continue to say that from my whanaunga, and also a Māori woman bishop. And you know, I think that these are reasons for celebration. And I absolutely take my place alongside that long line of supporting wahine in our church. So it's been my privilege to be working alongside you recently. I kind of figure, and so yes, you've heard I'm from Te Aupauri, from Ngāpuhi and Ngāti Porou. My Te Aupauri side is probably the strongest of my Anglican motivation and persuasion in life, and I will speak to that shortly. But I was thinking, we're in afternoon tea, and we've just completed afternoon tea, should I say, and I kind of thought it might be a good opportunity for us to just participate. Because I think that when we think about, subject matters like reconciliation and restoration, it's about looking at ourselves and what that looks like to be of a reconciliatory role alongside of restoration. And so to start us off, I've got this little thing that I'd like us to be a part of, and I'm going to move away from the mic, but my children tell me that my voice is very strong, and I will attest to, in another lifetime in the 1990s, I used to be the Sunday school teacher here at Holy Sepulchre, and so I'm going to rely on that voice to reconcile me back to today. Kia ora tātou. So it's going to go like this. So I've got, and I'm going to need to have little 5 groups. And you can kind of stay where you are if you like, but you can huddle if you like. And I'm going to give you a sheet of paper. And so 5 kind of big groups. So you're going to have a group that's going to be A. You're going to have another group that's going to be E. So A, E, I, O, U. All right, so we're just going to do an uplifting to continue the momentum that was started earlier this morning. But as we've had a big lunch and we've had a delicious, sweet afternoon tea, let's do something to hakina ourselves. So I'm going to start at this end. So kia ora whaeha. So we're going to start Kia ora tātou. Oh, let us just get our breath and continue on. So, I want to begin with introducing to you those who, in my work of reconciliation and restoration, which is really the word that I gave for the role, because originally I was invited, as Bishop Y knows, I was invited to be the Commissary of Redress. I decided that actually redress is the end product of bringing people together. So reconciling inside a subject matter that's that in the year and maybe just over a year and a half that I've been in this position, I've listened to people talk about me and talk about the way, oh, that's that woman with the abuse. That's the woman who talks about abuse, historical abuse. Oh, how do I introduce myself, you know? And so I want people to know, first of all, I come from a long line. Like many of you who are here today are my whanaunga. And many of you, I've not been adopted, but I've pledged an adoption and applied to be part of your different hui o morangi at different times. And so I want to introduce to you people who have been significant inside this topic of many hands to hold us. And in my translation, because te reo Māori was my first language, it's about ngā ringa ātawhai. Ngā ringa ātawhai, and I want to introduce you to some of those people who have been those who have provided that ringa ātawhai to me and to the work that I do. I want to firstly introduce you to Reverend Puti Murray. Reverend Puti Murray, who hails from the far north. Her maiden name is Kapa, which is the same as my maiden name. She's a first cousin to my father and a first cousin to Uncle Matu. That's their Te Upodi connection. And she had a really special, and some of you who were with me at Te Kuiti over the weekend, you will know this story. And in fact, after the hui in Te Kuiti on Saturday, we named Bishop Philip Auntie. So, Auntie Puti, and I'll do the short version, back in the 90s I was working as a social worker in the Department of Social Welfare. I had been there for several years. I was a senior social worker and had a nice little team, etc. My auntie on this wonderful August afternoon came into the offices in Richmond Road, Grey Lynn, and asked to see me, sent the receptionist to come and get me. Her first words were not "lovely to see you, how are you, Hera? Lovely that I've come here to meet." I thought she was going to invite me out for lunch, but her words were "ka nui tēnā, me hoki mai koe ke te mahi mo te hahi." That's enough of your work here with the government. It's now time for you to return to the church, to give your time to the church. Unfortunately, at that very point in time, I was unable to. I explained to her that at the moment I have two sons who were attending St. Stephen's Boys College. I was, I think, probably 7 months heavily pregnant. My husband was completing his degree at university, and we just bought a new house. So economically, it wasn't a good time for me to move. I said to her, however, I will pray about this. And so I did. 6 months on, my auntie came back, as she said she would, and said, well, we are ready. I am ready to return home. It's your time. So after a quick response, I agreed to. I agreed to return to take up this role at the church with Te Whareruruhau o Meri. Slides, ma'am. And taking with me, and I want to acknowledge Reverend Atareta Hills. This is my sister, one of my sisters who's ordained priest, who is a priest, and also somebody who held that ringa atawhai for me. And then there's Atareta, and then there's Iritana. And so I guess you can see the picture that these hands that were there to hold and to look after me were very strong hands and very caring. And so here is the original Whareruruhau o Meri. And I mention my sisters because they too came with me with the position. Upon agreeing to take up this position, a bit like Carrie Ann this morning, you know, we believe that there's a God there and that we've been called to these special responsibilities. And the special responsibility was my chosen subject matter, which was looking after tamariki, which is what Te Whareruruhau became. When Auntie Puti had signed me up, there were just a few little details that she forgot to mention about the position. So it was full-time, so I had resigned from Department of Social Welfare, DSW, and there was a salary on the table of 40K for the year, for two people. And she said, but you're still young, you can find some other jobs, you could do this. And originally, Te Whareruruhau was set up as a women's centre. Some of you who will remember Whareruruhau from its early developments, we had the lovely Cherry Epai, or Hera Epai, she soon became. Auntie Puti's succession plan is what I want to say. Jenny was another one of those succession plans with Janie Marsden and Puti Murray, Auntie Puti. And so I became kind of uncertain how I'm going to report this to my husband for a start, that we're now on, it went from 40K to 20K in just a flick of a finger. And so I needed to be quick smart about what can I do, what skills. Because as a centre in Otahuhu, it was really a peaceful place for prayer. They had Bible study, there were cooking classes, and they were making curtains and tablecloth. I could hardly, put a thread through the needle, let alone expect to sew something. So I really needed to work hard to use my skills. And my skills were, I was a social worker, and my role was working with children and of an investigative nature. So that was the skill set that I brought to Te Whareruruhau o Miri. I want you, can we just go back to that slide, please? So I want you to just have a really good look at that photo. It's a very, very old whare, and it was by Eliza, I can't remember her husband's name, the Reverend Kenderdine, and his wife Eliza, who in the 18th century, 1880s, decided that this home in Otahuhu, which was run by the Anglican Trust for Women and Children, that the endowments there would also apply to tikanga Māori. So that was legislation. And so therefore Te Whareruruhau o Miri had assets that were to be shared with tikanga Māori. We didn't access that until a fine gentleman by the name of Dave Jackson took it upon himself to ensure that the funds were handed over to Taitokero tikanga Māori. Years on, and I was there for nearly 20 years. In my last 5 years, we were being asked by the new director, following the passing of Dave Jackson, the new director wanted us off the property. And so that's when the real fun, the real fun happened, because we had a right to be there. We had a right. It was our given right to remain. And we did all sorts of things to keep ourselves inside that building and attached to Anglican Trust for Women and Children. And some of those little things we did, because the director had organised to send a truck to come and pick our things up. And so a little phone call to Te Karere, where my brother just happens to work. So he arrives at the whare, the big truck is there. Honekar's my chairperson. I ask him to stand out the front and do a little haka. Let's catch that. And we're being asked to leave, and so the director withdrew the eviction, and we maintained another year, but it kept on going. So this whare here has meant a lot to me. I understand that the current Whareruruhau has since moved. I would have just stayed there because it was our right. So just then look at those beautiful gardens. I'll show you shortly what sort of things we did. So in our next slide, it'll show tamariki. So I decided that we will provide a safe place for children to come in and to receive social work intervention and counselling. It wasn't too long before, and I'd say at least 6 months before, our funding went from 40K to 150. And it was really about using your skill sets. I was a contractor funder role when I was at DSW, so I completed all the approvals and registrations and COPS documents and what have you, and within 6 months we became an approved provider of services. And we went from 2 people that I had to share that enormous budget with 40K We went from 2 to 8, including Hirani, Reverend Dr. Hirani Ka, who worked for us as well. And we became a bigger team. We started to grow. We grew out of our former building and had to build. We put a application to the ASB, and we were able to secure 500,000 to help further develop the buildings. And so my focus at the time was on children, and still is today, and bringing tamariki into our spaces who had suffered as a result of many forms of abuse. And after several years, we started to talk about having these safe places for children in the school holidays. It became obvious to us, my staff and I, after perhaps 7-8 months, that when the children returned from the school holidays, they had new stories of abuse, of violence, etc., etc. So we decided to set up our school holiday program, talked with parents about this, got some real buy-in from the experience, those who had lived experience. We didn't go to a crystal ball and think, is this a good idea? We listened to the voices of lived. And so we put the idea to the tamariki that we're coming in weekly. How do you feel about coming to spend your school holidays here at the whare with us? We circulated and socialised newsletters across all parishes, Tikanga Pākehā particularly, and Tikanga Māori, and asked for some support for towels, old clothes, old sheets, etc., and received lots and lots of donations. So then it was important that we put a name to this rōpū instead of just having them the whare kids. So we had a little competition to decide what name would we like to give for your holiday program. They came up with lots of names, including Southside Rocks. We rock, we da-da-da-da, until we had this little group came and presented their name and spoke to it, and it was a winner. Everybody agreed, Rangatahi Jam. One, because Rangatahi Jam stands for Jesus and me, and someone else came up with, because I like jam on my toast. So we came up with that name for our tamariki, Rangatahi Jam. And you couldn't, you heard what the budget looked like. So there was no going to Rainbow's End, or there was no going to bungee jumps and such like. So on our next slide, we utilised our chapel on site. We had and it's still there, the little chapel there. It's a Mary Magdalene chapel, and it became the children's playground. And the playground there was, I think we were in a competition. Do any of you remember the Bop It? The Bop It, those game thingies? Yeah, Bop It, Twist It, all those sorts. So we played Bop It inside the chapel. And it was interesting to listen to how comfortable the kids became being inside chapel, introducing it. And so they became that familiar when we visited. So in our holiday program, every Thursday I would do a church trail. We introduced church trail was so that the parishioners who had donated to us can see where their donations were going. So when we went out to visit, and we were looking for a name for that, so we're going to visit churches today. So what does that look like, Whaia? I said, well, it means we go from Mangere, we'll start off at Te Pauherenga Waka, then we would go to St. Andrews, and I loved that somebody was from St. Andrews? Yes, Glencarry was there, so that was our other promising support there, and St. Matthew's in the city. And so one of the children said to us one day that my parents used to go on a pub crawl. Is this called a church crawl? You know. So we turned it into church trail. But you know, the voices are important, and so it helps us to really tune in to what they're talking about and just reminds us of the context that they come from. And so, yes, we're going on church trails. And in my years there, we probably had visited 72 churches. And so these wonderful parishes would say to us, oh, Hera, what else can we do? You know, we've done the sheets, we've done the towels, we've done the da-da-da-da. I said, so would it be a hardship if we asked you to donate money so that we can secure someone to do this work? So I humbly offered $500 from each of the different parishes. They told me they could do better. And so as a result, we got $2,000 from 70 churches. That's pretty good. That is pretty amazing, and I will always be grateful. They saw the fruits of their donations. Every year we would hold the tamariki, and in the next slide, we would have the tamariki being resourceful, and having loads of fun. As I said earlier, in our early days, funding wasn't great till we got to the latter part of my time there. But this is 10-pin bowling, Māori styles. So you're filling up all these empty drink bottles, and you've got some tennis balls, and it's now 10-pin bowling. You know, and we were resourceful. It meant we didn't have to go and borrow or steal or take from places that we were uncomfortable with. And so the tamariki made this up, so it became a lot of fun for them. And in the next slide, here we are here, how comfortably we play in our chapel. So it was the place where they learned to sing, you can see the young girl holding a boppet, and those two there were the winners of the boppet. So you're getting a sense of what this person who's now the commissary of reconciliation and restoration comes from. And in our next slide, we're always teaching table of honour, tamariki recognised and appreciated. So this table of honour, you're selected by your team to sit up at this top table, and you're taught that when you're invited to sit at that top table, you thank them, you mihi to them, and thank them for recognising you inside that space. It's a really low-key but very uplifting for tamariki who have come from struggling backgrounds to be recognised as important people. You know, and the slides will show you. Here we have this marvellous group. We only had 2 girl leaders. The rest were very shy, but we were able to identify some of the leaders. You can see why. When you come from some of those tough places. And now here they are showing their fun side. We've worked one of them's my son, the one with the glasses, who's getting married next week in Waiheke, by the way. And so their leadership was important for a lot of these kids. Good, solid, role model males are important as well. And trying to teach these young boys to be that. We're recognising our church helpers. You'll see a few familiar faces in there. Many of them have passed on. And it wasn't just the elderly that we recognised. There were a lot of our young kids that were coming into the centre. You see Christina Tapu, Joan Metch, a lot of familiar faces that are no longer with us. But I wanted always to kind of recognise the helpers Joan Metz, you saw that beautiful garden at the beginning? She was responsible for looking after that garden. And lo and behold, if somebody played inside her garden. You know, a wonderful writer and author of huge talent. And yet in the Māngere, because she was at Te Pauheranga Waka, and in our community, she wanted to just be a part of these children's lives. And in our community awards, you saw earlier Honourable Winnie Laban, an award to Mere Knight. Can you imagine somebody like Hone Ka, who's her cousin? She comes up, imagine her walking down the aisle here, and as she makes her way down, he's standing there singing his song. Oh, what a night, you know? And she's walking down, she was an amazing wahine. And here's the generosity of love, Dr. Joan Metz. She said she wanted on her certificate something to say, something said about her wonderful garden. And here's the Archdeacon Dr. Hone Ka, my chairperson. And Hone was with me for a fair number of years. Before him, there was Kito, and before Kito, we had George Bird Karaka. And here we are. This is a process. This is when I was with Te Manawa Te Upoko o Te Ika, and this was us introducing new and old kaupapa. And so the introduction, and I'm putting this up here because I think it's important when we have new kaupapa to introduce, we have to socialise this. We can't just come up and say, right, the commissary's going to have them, guys, get on board. It's really important that you know who's leading this work, what they, you know, what's your tenor? What does it look like? I can stand up here and say, yes, I went to Teachers College, I studied at Auckland University, which I did, I studied down in Waikato, but actually this is the tenor of what I can do and what I have done. And so introducing new kaupapa, like the commissary, like historical abuse, you've seen the work that's been done with young people, and the past, the present, and the future. You might know somebody in that photograph, Bishop. You might know somebody in there. And this is just exciting how this was the Kahui Wahine Hui in Gisborne, and the theme of the hui was the past, the present, and the future. And there we are substituting as stars in your eyes. Stars in your eyes. And the person there with the microphone is, instead of Simon, she's Simone. And I believe this group wanted to be the Bee Gees, I think. The Bee Gees, because they were, wait for it, staying alive, staying alive. Staying alive. You know? And I think that these are some of the places that we can go when we share our skills with each other, when our ringa atawhai are shared with each other, and learning with humility. And I think that these two wahine toa ceremoniously acknowledged all the work that was being done. Lady Doris and Whaiamihi together leading us in wahine in the church. And of course, here I am again, abuse and violence prevention across the world. Now I think it was Tai, talked earlier about the World Council of Churches in 1997. I travelled over to Brazil. I was an observer on behalf of Tai Tokerau, on behalf of the Anglican Church of Aotearoa. And my role, you heard me say, was an observer. Observer. It's the same meaning as it was then. And as a result, I attended the Indigenous Peoples Conference. At the conference, the person from Bolivia was unable to attend, and so the conference organisers asked the 50 nations that were present if there was anybody who could speak on, or who was able to speak on behalf of the Indigenous conference. And so I put my hand up, because I remember 2 weeks before travelling to Brazil, I had gone to Australia, and I wrote and did a presentation on gospel and culture. So I put my hand up, and there were 2 others. One was from Sami, was a Sami woman, and the other was an Australian bloke. And so they invited us to do our presentations. Aotearoa being the A's in the list. I went first before Australia. And then the Sami woman and the Australian guy, they withdrew. They withdrew and asked if I would speak on behalf of the Indigenous desk. And so I did, and my famous subject was abuse and violence prevention across the world. And then I was elected to be a part of the Central Committee for the World Council of Churches, and sat comfortably inside the work of Bishop Tutu. And just, I was frozen for a start, because they said to me, Hera, from the Indigenous desk, you will then need to present to the plenary. I said, how many of them? Because our whole church was nearly only about 180 at Huiamorangi, and they said there's just a little bit over. So I turned up at the plenary, and there's 6,000, and I was like, and then you get fitted out with all these headphones, and you're supposed to be speaking slowly, because I wondered why my jokes didn't fly very well. The joke was happening here and they're laughing later. But I soon became familiar with it, and the subject matter was always about prevention of abuse and violence. I was trying to look for a photograph earlier, because while in Brazil, we were part of a rally through the streets of Porto Alegre with Bishop Tutu, and it was amazing, and it was overcoming violence, and he was out there in front. I'm sure many of you have met him, because I know he's been lots of places, and he was like this little beady-eyed, and he wears this cap, and he's like, come on, Miss Aotearoa, come on, Miss Aotearoa, let's get ourselves ready, let's get going. Because you're going to be carrying a big load on your shoulders moving forward. And so who's going to say no to Bishop Tutu to be a part of the Indigenous movement? And then, and my biggest, probably, one of my memories of him also was at the airport in Sao Paulo, and he's way up the front with his entourage, and I'm way at the back with my plebs, and we're standing there, and he says, up here, and he just points out, come with me, Miss Aotearoa. And so we do. And it showed me the strength of humility, the strength of never forgetting where you come from, and the process of making sure that when you're carrying this cross, that it soon becomes you. And those adventures, those experiences from my time in the World Council became even more and more profound. And coming home and sharing with our people. I remember going to Huiamorangi, Komiti Tumuaki, even if you were just bringing home some beads, even if you were bringing home a scarf. I remember I must have got broke buying lots of cassocks and stalls and things like that, because I knew that there'll be a story told by their priest. There's stories for us to share with each other, that if we, somebody from Te Aupori can, and we only got one shop inside Te Kao, and it's a petrol station, and that's all. And so if you're that little and quite, a plebe, as my kids would call it, but you can be recognised and recognise the wealth that you bring from those smaller communities. And this one here is those sharing experiences to help build safe communities. This was my one of the committees that I led. Several, they used to, Living Letters was the name of the groups, and so I took one to Taiwan, and I took another one to Darwin. And it was really about this same subject matter here. It was, and it continues to be, the work of lived experience. Those who had been hurt inside our institutions, whether they're schools, the churches, our institutes that are supposed to be looking after people. There have been many. And so the person you heard being spoken about, and the history that comes with her, and her being me, has been my God-given responsibility to do this work. And so I want to bring us into here and how we are working, and hopefully alongside the Standards Commission. There was no real direction for this role, as I said earlier. I gave it that name, Reconciliation and Restoration. To date, I have met with 307 survivors of abuse inside Anglican institutes. A high number of them, a high number of those survivors, not all of them are asking for retribution. Many of them don't want to be identified. Some of them are slowly returning to the church. I want to, and not because, I'm sure if I spent more time at the different churches, we could highlight the different places that are safe for a lot of these survivors to return to. I want to say that during this year I've been very grateful, very, very grateful to our new Dean, Katie Lawrence, who out of the blue, like absolutely out of the blue, invited me. I've been working at my house, at my dinner table, and Katie had come to visit my sister, Iritana, of which we were very grateful, and saw my gear set up there. And later, she invited me to take up a position, or to take up an office space at the Wellington Cathedral. And this has been an absolute blessing for me personally, I would say. It's given me something to get out of my pajamas for and go and do some work and be present in a place that has lots of history. And so I have since brought through some of the survivors who have reluctantly wanted to be a part of church again, but they are slowly coming into the cathedral. They enjoy looking around. There's lots to see. It doesn't have the same familiarity of when they had been abused in the church. They're pleasantly surprised to see that there's young people coming into the church. So my role in working alongside survivors has been really simple. You can see how simple I am. And it's being able to reach out to those who have identified, and I want to also acknowledge the Huiamorangi ki te manawa te wheke for inviting me to be a part of some of your learning modules. I've really appreciated that. It's given me also an audience that I can test myself on, and for them to say, "Oh, e Hera e rupahu ana koe." You know, stop making things up. Or also to say to me, "We find it really scary when you use too many big words." I said, "Well, that's helpful because I don't have many of those anyway." But it is also useful to have your own reo. And I've recognised that in my visits across parishes as well as across Huiamorangi. I am really looking forward to developing some resources. It was a bit of an anti-putti situation coming into this role, and Bishop Y knows that. Bishop Y has been kind of slowly pushing that envelope. Yeah, and I'll just leave it there because I'm polite today. So it is a gentle giant role. It's doing things like using a trauma-informed approach and looking. So you heard Wendy speaking earlier from the Commission's perspective, and mine is as the Commissary, and I remind myself that I'm acting on behalf of the Archbishops, which sometimes I'm a little unsure about what that looks like, mostly because it's a lonely journey. It's been a very, very lonely journey, so I enjoy this opportunity speaking with people, sharing stories with people. I want to know what's happening in your spaces, because I know that the 300 that I'm working with is just the tip of the iceberg. My work with the Royal Commission in the last, while I was still in the public service, I held advisory roles with the Royal Commission and met with several of them, several survivors, and my advice really was around the principles that we know so well. Principle of aroha comes to us in two shades. One is love, one is compassion, one is also about boundaries. It's about a discipline. We have a discipline in aroha. You know, let's not get all be romanticised that it's airy, fairy and fluffy. There's a firm side to aroha. Aroha ai te tahi ki te tahi. So when I see you doing wrong, it's my role, it's my responsibility to say, pull you up, to address this. We need to sit down, huitahi, kōrero tahi, kia puta mai te ngāngara, kia whāngai atu mātou I taua mea e kōrero hia nei te aroha. So when we see what that looks like, let us look to remedies. Let us look at ways in which we can apply healing outreach. How do we work this? I've been asked several times about in my role, am I also working with perpetrators? Ooh, that's a harsh word. They're abusers. I whakahē rātou. I whakahē rātou ki taua kōtiro, ki taua wahine, ki taua tamaiti. Hey, see, that's our language for perpetrator. Nā hau I whakahe. Rapu ai tēnei mea te huarahi. Kia murua ai I ngā hara. We talk about it all the time. Our pre-book talks to us about murua te hara. You know, reconcile, restoration, healing. What does that look like? And so, reaching out to lived experience, I'm really proud of the church for this position in many ways, because as a government employee, it's not optional. It's not optional. Kei te he koe, there's the prison down here. There's the home down here. There's the da-da-da-da-da-da. I'm not saying that we are safeguarding perpetrators so that they continue e whakahe ana wa rātou mahi. We agree that it's absolutely unacceptable. So, how am I going for time? I don't want to be one of those ones, you know, like, how am I doing for time? So, oh, must be 15 minutes. I'll be finished. So, hohau te rongo, murua ngā hara, mahi whakatika. So, I talked about earlier those principles of aroha, kotahitanga. Those have to be living things, not just talking things. Me tino upono marika, we need to hold firm to these principles and be value holders, building our own bodies of knowledge. I'm really interested to listen to what people feel about historical abuse in your diocesan, in your huiamorangi, so we can work together. Because my experience is that when we're part of developing our bodies of knowledge, we become the responsible people. You know, we become the action people, those that motivate the next story and the next story. That's how I understand it to be. Let us make that difference. I know when I spoke with the Royal Commission, with our panel, and said that this is not sitting comfortably, that we have survivors who have experienced abuse at the hands of adults predominantly, and you're asking them to repeat and to repeat and repeat. How many times do they need to be re-triggered? Ours as a church, what I'd like you to be considering is how we prepare ourselves to welcome survivors, because they're not going to be coming in with a sign that says, I'm a survivor. But how do we prepare ourselves, and what is our readiness? Our readiness, things we can do for ourselves now, is to understand what trauma-informed practice looks like. Then you start to locate yourself inside that practice. It's having an awareness, knowing what triggers people. It's no longer acceptable, I think. It's no longer acceptable to make quick decisions, and I've spoken to a number of survivors and find themselves in a quandary because they've been asked to be the voice of survivors for a particular group. I think we as a church, we need to think about how we engage, talk with them, talk with survivors. How would they like us to ready ourselves to welcome back into the church, or to welcome in our presence? What does that look like? And I wanted to end with a little story, and I can try and keep it to 5 minutes. Years ago, I worked with this Catholic priest, and his name is, some of you might know it, His name is Hera Tate, Pa Tate, and he used to be up the road here at Tungawaka, which was the marae that another auntie, Whina Kupa, and Hera Tate, I spent my curacy, I suppose, when you're at school of social work, and I did my 6 months curacy with, or placement with him, and he took me through this process. I'm trying to shortcut the story, where he had a family that he was working with, where a young boy in this particular community had abused this young girl in the far north. And so he brought the situation to Tungawaka, and he said to me, all right, you need to get yourself ready. Your Mrs. Go-to social work, and I want you to tell me what you think later. And so the situation evolved where the two offending, the offending family and the victim family, he had invited them, because they were both of the Catholic Church, and he invited them to come to this hui of Hohou Te Rongo. And he invited the offending family first, and there was probably about, I don't know, maybe 18 to 20 of the offending family who came down, and matching numbers of the victim. And so he had a krakia, and in his krakia, he weaved a pathway for this family, giving them space to talk. So it might have gone something like, in God in your grace, you know what is before, all in te reo, you know what is before us, that we have family brought together by blood and in your name. And together we look for an outcome that best reaches a sense of understanding and appreciation for the process and accepting of responsibility. So I had this, that was kind of what, from my recollection. And so the offending family gets up, and the first person to get up was his grandfather. And he stands there, and you can see the victim family, the whānau, were like, because they're cousins, they're from the same place. And he stood up and mihi to everybody. And e pēnei ai ona kōrero, nāku kē te he. My mokopuna who has offended is my fault. That I bear the brunt of my mokopuna's bad behaviour. And for that reason we are here. We are here to take whatever comes our way, whether we end up in prison, in a police cell, or beggars on the side of the road. We are here on behalf of our mokopuna. And then the grandmother gets up and says pretty much, something similar, but to talk about when that mokopuna was little. And there's all this whakapapa that's going on. And then on the victim's side, the family stands up there and says, we didn't come here to talk about your whakapapa. We've come here to talk about your violation to my daughter. The violation through all of us has hindered us, basically, all speaking in Māori, has hindered us from once being a proud family. Your violation on our daughter is a violation of our whole hapu. And we don't accept it. And then they offend, and there was this conversation that was going, and then in the end, the young boy gets up and he said, because from the victim's family talked about, we don't ever want to see you at our marae. You are no longer welcome. You have made our marae an unsafe place to be. He stands up and he puts his hand up and says, I will turn myself in. I will turn myself in, and that I will happily do the time, but not my family, not my parents, not my grandparents. The victim family get up, another one of the uncles, and says, no, that's not what we want. We know what prison life looks like. You will come back worse. No good to our marae, no good to our whakapapa, no good to anybody. So there were these discussions that were held. And I suppose just very, very quickly, this is a really, really short version, but it ended up in him being banished from the marae. It broke his parents' heart, absolutely broke his parents' heart. You know, they were of the land, they were, and he was banished, and there were several programs that he needed to be a part of, and she and the young girl put her hand up to say, and said that she wanted to say something, and she really broke the camel's back in her corridor, you know. And inside of me, my social work practice mind was saying, this just doesn't happen, you know. There are many levels. This would never happen. In my role as a government social worker. But the outcome, she stood up and talked about what would feel safe for her. She said, I'm only saying this because my mum and dad are here, my grandparents are here, my aunties, da-da-da-da-da. So she had the total support of her whānau. That gave her the courage to say, I don't ever want to see you at our marae. I will be telling every girl cousin of mine about you. You know, and inside of the process that was happening, we listened to Muruanga Hala, we listened to Hohau I Te Rongo, we looked at Te Ao Huri Huri, Puta Noa Ki Te Ao Marama, you know, and the whole kind of, you saw the conceptual frameworks that Marsden used to always talk about him in his cosmos, but you saw them playing out in that Māori theology. But he begged to the hui that he goes to jail instead, then put his family through all of this. And so, you know, those discussions, those narratives or that kōrero and facilitated with a view of working this through. I'm not saying that that's what the role of the commissary is to do, but I'm speaking of examples of what that looked like, where it gave action to principalities of aroha, tikanga, kaichakitanga, and wairuatanga. You know, when you see them in action, it's like, there's a breath being taken. And so in this role, I'm going to be looking forward to, I hope, to come and visit with the different parishes. I know that just recently I got this whare. Some of you might know me from my whare, te kawa o te marae. I love using that. I took it up, I used to have it a lot at te upoko, manawa te wheke, at the cathedral. We had you know, it's marvellous. There's simplicities, and we get the job done. That's what we women do. We get the job done. And nō reira, ka nui tēnei mō tēnei wāhanga. I'm sorry, this is not on my budget to have business cards at the moment. I have no flyers. I have very minimal, only what manawa te wheke are able to throw my way, I gladly take hold of. And I appreciate the time here today, but as a commissary of what I'd like for you to take away from my kōrero is your contribution to what preparation and readiness to work with survivors might look like. Nō reira e te whare, tūtū mai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa, and my waiata is Arohaina, arohaina, arohaina e te atua.
kōrero today, the importance of sitting still and listening to the narratives, listening to the stories, to not be afraid of what we hear, because we have been shored up by those who have come before us, who have implanted in us a heart and a love for the people of God, for all people. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for everything. It was challenging what you said, but it's a challenge to us as well. And so I just want to say thank you, and this is just a small token to recognise everything that you do. Kia ora.
Just before I sit down, my last slide, actually, is the book. So I just want to big ups to this book, Tala Noa, lovely story in there, page 17, just saying, where Jenny talks about our women. Auntie Puti's featured in there as well. And thank you all for those who have contributed to this beautiful book. Noho rā mai.
Kia ora wahine nā. At this time we were supposed to caucus in our tikanga groups, but I think we've had a long day. We've had some really dynamic speakers today, and I think we need to sit in our little groups, wherever that may be, just to reflect on what you've heard today, not necessarily in our tikanga groups. But I think we'll just call it end for now. Let you just relax. Our dinner's going to be at 6 o'clock.